So this next question comes to us from a company that has a patent portfolio, and they're having a hard time forecasting costs, right? Often they're having to put together budgets for the next year, the next quarter, next month, and they want to know what they're likely to spend. And the bigger the patent portfolio, the easier it is to predict, because you get laws of averages kicking in and so forth. But if you kind of have these spurious little events coming through, it becomes much harder to predict what costs are going to be. So the triangle tool will tell you for a particular filing what it's going to cost in the short term and what it's going to cost for the remainder of the cycle, and an estimate on what you've spent. So it gives you a bead for a particular file, and looking out to the immediate future can kind of tell whether or not you have an office action coming up or something like that. So the short-term prediction is relatively easy. If you had 5 files, you could look at the 5 files and add up the costs that you're getting in the prediction and get a good idea on what you might be spending over the next few months. It's pretty unpredictable because the deadlines for these are often 3 to 6 months, and you don't know if your counsel is going to work on it immediately or a month later. So knowing real precisely is tough. Often you can ask your counsel for a prediction. Sometimes we'll have counsel that comes to us 3 weeks into the month saying, what do you think it's going to be for the month? And you can get an all right estimation under those circumstances. Knowing what it'll be for the next month, especially if it's spurious things coming up, really hard to know. Really hard to know, especially if you're not doing a lot of work with that counsel on the patents. So I would say if you're spending less than $100,000 a year, it's really hard to know month to month what it's going to be. But you might look at the files and see what's coming up, and then you can have an idea of what things are going to cost. And in the tip tool, we provide an interface where you can kind of put in pricing, especially if your counsel has given you fixed fees for certain things, you can put in those fixed fees. And that's what is used then to predict what it's going to be, a little bit into the future. So you can get a pretty good idea like that. And then always factoring in that there are little things that come up. There's an assignment that needs to be filed, or a declaration, or there's missing parts. There's all these little filings that come up with the patent office. Some T wasn't crossed or some I wasn't dotted, and that needs to be fixed up. And that's just a regular part of working with any sort of bureaucratic agency. They're constantly finding little minutia and digging deep into the rules and interpreting them perhaps in a way that you hadn't anticipated in advance. So there's a little bit of that goes on. And then the big things that cost money are filing of new patents, foreign filing. If you have the deadlines are known well in advance, and those hit all at the same time. So if you have a deadline coming up to foreign file a patent application, are you going into 1 foreign country, or are you going into 5? And there are tools to estimate what that might be. Generally, when you start off the process in a foreign country, you're looking at $5,000 to $10,000 per country to have the case filed, to pay the government fees for filing. Sometimes there's translation costs and that sort of thing. But there are tools that will give a prediction on those sorts of things. But knowing that that's coming up, or you have 3 cases that need to be foreign filed, you can start to kind of do the math in that way to come up with better estimates of what's going on. Your annuity service also has a prediction and can tell you what's coming up. You might have costs associated with if you have some sort of incentive program within your company where you're paying inventors a little bonus when they file patents or get patents issued. You can add that up too. And taking into account all those costs, it's a little bit of work to figure it out. And it's a little bit of work to come up with an estimate. If you're doing a steady flow, often when I'm giving these estimates, I'm looking at the last 4 months to kind of see what the burn rate was. And for clients that are spending $1 million a year or so on their patent protection, things start to average out, and 1 month starts to look like the next, or sometimes it's cyclical, where we have one particular client that has a big conference every year. And going into the conference, we do a bunch of filings, and going out of the conference, we do a bunch of filings. So it ends up being very cyclical. So you might look at what it was last year. And that's a pretty easy way to do a prediction, because looking at the individual files is time consuming, but it's probably the most accurate way to come up with an estimate of what you're going to be spending. But looking at the trends, maybe you're scaling up your patent portfolio and you're seeing some trends in those numbers, and you can kind of extrapolate from there. That often is a pretty accurate way to figure out what you're going to be spending soon. But it's tough, and I know often folks want to know what things are going to cost, and they want to have predictability, and it just, it kind of doesn't work that way, because you're left to the vagaries of what the patent office is imposing upon you. They have cycles too. Toward the end of their fiscal year, you tend to see a rush of work coming through. So a lot of it's outside of your control. Certainly, on the filings, the new filings, and the filings that might need to be converted if you filed provisionals and you have to do non-provisionals. You can kind of go through there and add it up and get a sense of what's going on, and factor in a little bit of burn rate just to keep the existing portfolio going. So I wish there was an easier answer, and it is on our list of things to get to as we add new features to the tool, because we would just love to be able to say, push a button and here's what's going to be next month, here's what's going to be next quarter, here's what's going to be next year. So we're working toward that, but it'll require a lot of input from you using the tool, because nobody knows how many new patents you're going to file or how many different countries you're going to select. So it's always going to be a pretty interactive process to get a good answer. So I apologize. It's a tough thing to do. We get the question all the time. I can help you through that, if you're using me for your legal services, or your counsel can. But know that it's pretty hard, especially if you have a smaller portfolio where things are coming up very spuriously. So at any rate, if you have any further questions or any specific questions you want answered, please put them in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video if you got something out of it, and subscribe to the channel. So thank you.